Welcome everyone to another episode of Southern Sorcery. Today we're doing it a little bit differently. As you can see, the setting is slightly different. Behind me, we thought it might be interesting to do a little bit of feng shui in our video today. We are looking at Eladamri Korvecdal. This is the new Eladamri from Modern Horizons 3 that is just getting ready to come out. He is an elf warrior, a legendary creature for 1 and 2 green, and says you may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast creature cards from the top of your library, and then you can pay a green and tap Eladamri and 2 untapped creatures you control, and then you can reveal a card from your hand or from the top of your library. If you do, you can put it onto the battlefield. Activate this only during your turn. So this Eladamri is drastically different than the other Eladamri that we know and love from eons ago from the reserved list. This one wants to cheat big creatures into play, and he does a very good job of doing so. I think he's going to be the new mono green elf go-to. However, when we did a poll on Twitter and on YouTube, the results came back strongly against my opinion. So today I'm going to try to convince you that this should be the next mono green elves commander by a landslide. We want to give a big shout out to all of our patrons. Thank you so much for all of your support. It helps us so much to continue doing what we love to do and giving away awesome things on our channel. So if you've never seen us before, definitely give us a look. We give away lots of pre-cons and other things. We are running giveaways almost constantly. And so if that's something you think you enjoy, go ahead and drop a like on this video and give us a subscribe. It only takes a second to hit that button. Ring the bell beside of it so you never miss out on our new uploads. We also have some brand new merchandise that you can see me sporting that right here. We've got a whole bunch of designs. Those should be beneath the video as well. Check those out if you want to support that way and you love Magic merch. And all of our merch is heavily influenced, of course, by Magic the Gathering. So how are we going to make this the most powerful green Elves commander build that there is? Well, let's get right on into it. So first we're going to just go through our elves and creatures that we have in the deck, and as you might expect, there are a ton of staple elves with the ability of being able to cast creatures from the top of your library. That is a huge card advantage in our favor. So we have opted for anything that we can get with a creature. Any effects that we can get with a creature, we've opted for those as opposed to sorceries or instants. So an example would be Wood Elves, which goes and gets a basic land for you as opposed to something like a Cultivate or a Farseek or Rampant Growth as a sorcery, because we can go get them with the elves from the top of our library, which will allow us to keep casting through our deck. If we have mana available to keep casting, it is almost like a Bolas's Citadel, and if you know anything about that card, you know what a powerhouse it is. So that's what this commander can do. So first up, we've got Circle of Dreams Druid. It is 3 green, and it taps for a green for each creature you control. So that's nice. They don't have to be elves, and a good card. Next, we've got Devoted Druid. It is 1 and a green, and it taps to add 1, and then you can put a -1/-1 counter on Devoted Druid to untap Devoted Druid. So just another mana dork. We've also got Elvish Archdruid for 1 and 2 greens. It is a 2/2 that taps for green for each elf you control, so potentially a big payoff. And then he also is a lord, granting our other elves +1/+1. Then we've got Elvish Champion. This is 1 and 2 green for an elf that all elves get +1/+1, so another lord, and have Forest Walk. So if your opponents control a forest, they can't block elves as they have Forest Walk. So very good in this deck. Then we have Elvish Harbinger. It is 2 and a green for a 1/2 that when it enters a battlefield, you may search your library for an elf card, reveal it, and then put that card on top of your library after you shuffle. And then it also is a mana dork and taps for 1 mana of any color. Obviously just green in this deck. Next we've got Elvish Mystic. It's 1 green for a 1/1 that taps for green. Elvish Warmaster is 1 and a green for a 2/2 that says whenever 1 or more elves enter the battlefield under your control, make a 1/1 elf warrior. This triggers only once each turn. And then it has a semi-overrun effect built into it that you can pay into. It is 5 and 2 green. Elves you control get +2/+2 and gain Death Touch until the end of turn. Next, we've got Azuri Renegade Leader for 1 and 2 green for a 2/2, and you can pay a green to regenerate a target elf, or you can pay 2 and 3 green into it, and elf creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample until the end of turn. So another overrun effect on one of our elves. Then we've got Farhaven Elf. It is 2 and a green. It says when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card and then put it onto the battlefield tapped and then shuffle. So another ramp. Then we have Fierce Empath. It's 2 and a green for an elf. It says when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a creature card with mana value 6 or greater, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. This is great with our commander because we can go get something massive, put it into our hand, and then cheat it into play with Eladamri. Then we've got Fendhorn Elves, another mana dork for a green, and it taps for a green. It is a 1/1. Then we have Immaculate Magistrate, and it is 3 and a green for a 2/2. And it says tap, put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature for each elf you control. So potentially this could be a great way to permanently buff some of our creatures. Then we have Joraga Warcaller. It is 1 green for a 1/1, and you can kick it whenever it enters the battlefield for 1 and a green. And however many times you want to kick it, it enters the battlefield with that many +1/+1 counters on it. And then other creatures you control get +1/+1 for each counter that is on Joraga Warcaller. So that's a big buff. So then you could take something like Immaculate Magistrate, tap it, put a whole bunch of counters on Joraga Warcaller, and then all of our elves will get that buff. So very synergistic. Then we have Llanowar Elves. It is 1 green for a 1/1 that taps for green, so another mana dork. Then we have Marwyn the Nurturer. It is 2 and a green for a legendary elf druid. Whenever another elf enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Marwyn the Nurturer. So Marwyn can potentially get pretty big. And then you can tap for green equal to the amount of Marwyn's power. So a big mana dork. Then we've got Nullmage Shepherd for 3 and a green. It is a 2/4, and it says you can tap 4 untapped creatures you control to destroy a target artifact or an enchantment. So this is extremely useful. Then we have Omnath, Locus of Mana. Not an elf, but it's a elemental creature that says you don't lose unspent green mana as steps and phases end. Omnath, Locus of Mana, gets +1/+1 for each unspent green mana you have. So this is a mana bank for us. So if we've got big mana dorks and we've not got as much in hand as maybe we hope and we're done casting, we can save our green mana with Omnath so that we can start our next turn, and then Omnath gets massive depending on how much green mana you have. Then we've got Priest of Titania. It is 1 and a green for a elf that is a 1/1, and it says add green for each elf on the battlefield. So that's going to include your opponent's battlefields as well. So if anybody else has elves, it's going to count that as well. Then we've got Reclamation Sage. Whenever it enters a battlefield, you may destroy a target artifact or enchantment. It's 2 and a green. Then we've got Sakura Tribe Elder. This is 1 and a green, and it says sacrifice Steve, search your library for a basic land card, then put that card onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So more ramp. Then we've got Trickster's Elk. It is 2 and a green. And you can cast it for its bestow cost, which is 1 and a green. And if you cast it for its bestow cost, it's an aura spell, and you can enchant a target creature. And then it says, enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a green elk creature with base power toughness 3/3. So a great way to deal with threats that are on our board. We also have Wirewood Channeler. This is 3 and a green for an elf that says, tap for X mana of any color, where X is the number of elves on the battlefield. So in our deck, it's just going to be green, so it's going to be basically the same thing as Priest of Titania, but in other decks, that's super useful because you can tap it for other colors. Next, we've got Wood Elves for 2 and a green. It's a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for a forest card, put that onto the battlefield, and then shuffle, so it comes in untapped. And then our last elf here is going to be Yeva, not Nature's Herald. It is 2 green for an elf that has flash and says you can cast green creature spells as though they had flash, and she is a 4/4. So that is going to take us through the majority of our elves. However, we are not anywhere near done with the creature cards in this deck. There are tons of creatures that do other things as well. So we'll go ahead and move on into our card draw and deck manipulation part of our deck. So this is going to be all cards that draw cards, give us card advantage, or manipulate the top of our decks in some way. So first up, we're going to have Beast Whisperer. It's 2 green for an elf, and it says whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. Then we've got Crop Rotation. This is 1 green, and it says as an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a land. Search your library for a land card, then put that card onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. If you have a Guy's Cradle, you're going to go get that. If you've got a Nykthos, you're going to go get that. If you've got a Rogue's Passage, then you need something to be unblockable, you're going to go get that. This is just going to allow you to go get a utility land at the cost of sacrificing a land and 1 green, so a very good card. Then we have Elvish Visionary. It is 1 and a green, and when it enters the battlefield, draw a card, so it's just a cantrip, but it does draw a card. Then we've got Exploration. This is 1 green, and it's going to allow us to play an additional land on each of our turns. This is going to be helpful as we want to keep moving through the top of our deck and casting creature cards from the top. So Exploration is just a way to get us the ability to unload more and obviously ramp more. Then we've got Guardian Project. It's an enchantment for 3 and a green, and it says, whenever a non-token creature enters a battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, draw a card. So this is going to draw us a card almost every time. Then we've got Leaf Crown Visionary. It is green, and it's a 1/1. It says other elves you control get +1/+1. And whenever you cast an elf spell, you may pay a green, and if you do, then draw a card. And then we have Lifecrafter's Bestiary, which is extremely similar, except for it's an artifact. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, scry 1. This is also nice because we can manipulate the top of our deck a little bit. And then when you cast a creature spell, you can pay a green, and if you do, draw a card. Then we have Oron Frostfang. It is 3 green for a snake. It says attacking creatures you control have death touch. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So that's going to be for any time we deal combat damage, we can draw a card. Then we have Oracle of Maldia for 3 and a green. This is an elf shaman. It's a 2/2, and it says you can play an additional land on each of your turns. You play with the top card of your library revealed, and you can play lands from the top of your library. So again, just another way to continue casting creature spells from the top of our library. So when we bump into a land, we'll have a way to go ahead and play that land and then hopefully keep being able to cast creature spells. Then we've got Scroll Rack. This is 2 for an artifact. You pay 1, tap it, and you exile any number of cards from your hand face down. Put that many cards from the top of your library into your hand. Then you can look at the exiled cards and put them on top of your library in any order. So again, more top deck manipulation so that you can draw a land and then have a creature to play from the top of your library, as opposed to drawing a creature and then there being a land on top of your library and you can't cast the land without the Oracle of Maldia. Then we have Soul of the Harvest for 4 green. It is a 6/6 with trample, elemental creature. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. A May ability is nice. And then we've got Staff of Domination. This is 3 for an artifact that has 5 different modes on it. You can pay 1 to untap the Staff of Domination. You can pay 2 and tap it to gain 1 life. You can pay 3 and tap it to untap a target creature. You can pay 4 and untap it to tap a target creature. And then you can pay 5 and tap it to draw a card. So this is a good way to draw some cards, potentially tap down your opponent's blockers so that you can get through some damage, or a way for you to potentially go infinite with some of these mana dorks that tap for enough to just tap and untap the Staff of Domination to have an infinite amount of mana, and from there then you could draw infinite amount of cards. You could tap down the entire board. You can untap Eladamri repeatedly to put out massive creatures and win the game. Then we've got Sylvan Library, which is 1 and a green. Some more top deck manipulation. At the beginning of your draw step, you can draw 2 additional cards. And if you do, choose 2 cards in your hand drawn this turn. For each of those cards, either pay 4 life or put them back on top of your library. So you could keep them and pay 4 life, or you can put them back in the order that you want, the 2 extra cards. And then we also have Sensei's Divining Top. It is 1 for an artifact that you can pay 1 to look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put them back in any order, and then you can tap Sensei's Divining Top to draw a card, and if you do, put Sensei's Top back on top of its owner's library. This next category, which is going to be our big stompy creatures. These are going to be the creatures that we want to cheat into play, that we are going to see a huge benefit from cheating these in. And we will start out here with Artisan of Kozilek. It is 9 colorless for an Eldrazi, and it says when you cast this spell, you may return a target creature card from the graveyard to the battlefield. So if you cheat it into play, you won't get that, as that is a cast cost, and Eladamri is not casting those creatures. You are just putting it onto the battlefield. It also has Annihilator 2. Next, we have Crater Hoof Behemoth, which is 5 and 3 green. Has haste, and when it enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X until the end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. So whether you cheat this in or cast it from the top of your library, you will still get all that, as that is an ETB effect, not a cast trigger. Then we have Earthquake Dragon. It is 14 colorless and a green. Normally you see this in dragon decks, as it is X less to cast, where X is the total mana value of dragons you control. It has flying and trample, and is a 10/10. You can also pay 2 and a green to sacrifice a land and return Earthquake Dragon from the graveyard to your hand. So also extremely good. We also have Eldrazi Devastator for 8. It is an Eldrazi. It's an 8/9 with trample. We also have Enray's Forerunners, which is 5 green, green, green for a boar that has vigilance, trample, and haste. And it says when it enters a battlefield, other creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain vigilance and trample until the end of turn. Then we have Galta, Stampede Tyrant for 5 and 3 green. It also has trample and is a 12/12, and it says when it enters the battlefield, put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. So extremely good if you've got a loaded hand. You use Eladamri to cast this for essentially nothing, and then you can put however many creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield as you want. Then we have Impervious Great Worm. This is 7 and 3 green. It has Indestructible and also Convoke, so you can tap creatures that you control to pay for 1 colorless mana or 1 mana of that creature's color. So potentially you could cast this for free if your board state was big enough, but mostly we want to cheat this out with Eladamri. Then we have Primal Crux, which is 6 green, has trample, and it says its power and toughness are equal to the number of green mana symbols in the mana costs of permanents you control. So potentially massive. It's at least going to be a 6/6 because it's going to see itself, and it has 6 green pips, so it's going to be that. Next we have Protein Hulk. This is 5 and 2 green. It says when it dies, search your library for any number of creature cards with total mana value 6 or less, put them onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. So you could go get a whole bunch of 1-drop mana dorks, or you could go get some creatures that are going to help you in whatever situation you're in. Then we have Soul of the Harvest for 4 and 2 green. It has trample. It is a 6/6, and whenever another non-token creature enters a battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. So that one is in the big creatures and the card draw section as well. We've got Terracodon, which is 6 and 2 green. When it enters a battlefield, you may destroy up to 3 target non-creature permanents. For each permanent put into a graveyard this way, its controller makes a 3/3 elephant. So it's like 3 Beast Withins. Then we have Ulvenwald Hydra for 4 and 2 green. It has reach, and its power and toughness are equal to the number of lands that you control. When it enters a battlefield, you can search your library for a land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. So it also ramps as it comes in. Then we've got Worldspine Worm. This is 8 and 3 green. For a total of 11, it has trample, and it says when it dies, put 3 5/5 green worm creature tokens with trample onto the battlefield. And when Wormspine Worm is put into a graveyard from anywhere, shuffle it into its owner's library. It is a 15/15. So another just absolutely massive creature. And then lastly, this one is not as big as the rest, but I put it here because it is expensive for an elf. It is 4 and 2 green. This is Wolverine Riders, and at the beginning of each upkeep, create a 1/1 elf warrior creature token. Whenever another elf enters a battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to its toughness. So a little bit of life gain, and it's going to help populate our board with more bodies, which is important in elves. So next, we have our last section, which is going to be our tap and untap effects. So this is going to be ways that we can hopefully abuse our commander by tapping him and being able to tap him again to cheat multiple things in per turn. So first up, we have Copperhorn Scout. This is 1 green for a 1/1. It says whenever it attacks, untap each other creature you control. So that's going to untap our whole board. Then we have Quirion Ranger for another 1 green. It is a 1/1, and it says return a target forest you control to its owner's hand, untap target creature, activate only once each turn. Then we have Seeker of Skybreak. It is 1 and a green. You tap it to untap a target creature. So we can use that one repeatedly if you can untap that, untap Eladamri, untap that, untap Eladamri, etc. Then we've got Umbral Mantle. This is a 3-drop artifact equipment, and it says equipped creature has pay 3, untap this creature. It also gets +2/+2 until the end of turn. It has a 0 equip cost, so that one's extremely good in here as you can pay into it repeatedly, and it's going to buff our commander as well. Next we have Wirewood Symbiote. It is 1 green for a 1/1 insect, and it says return an elf you control to its owner's hand and untap a target creature. Play this ability only once each turn. And then we have a few cards left that are not in any certain category, but we've got things like Lightning Greaves, which is protection for Eladamri. We also run Swiftfoot Boots, which is protection for Eladamri, or maybe one of our big mana dorks, big mana generators. We also have some ramp in Soul Ring. We also have a cool card here in Concordant Crossroads, 1 green, and creatures can attack or use abilities that include tap in the activation cost as soon as they come into play on their controller's side, which is a old way to just say creatures you control have haste. We also have Growing Rights of Itlamok. It's an enchantment for 2 and a green. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You can reveal a creature card from among them and put them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. And then at the beginning of your end step, if you control 4 or more creatures, you can transform Growing Rights of Itlamok, and when you flip it over to the backside, it is a land that taps for green, or that taps for green equal to the number of creatures you control, so a Gaia's Cradle, which is extremely good. Then under some instants, we've got some removal with Beast Within, which is just a classic green spell. We have a newer card, which is Galadriel Ambush. It is 3 and a green, and you create X 1/1 green warrior creature tokens, where X is the number of attacking creatures, and then you prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn by non-elf creatures. So it is a fog that also is going to make you a bunch of 1/1 elf warriors. Then we have Heroic Intervention, which permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. And then lastly, we have Crow's and Grip, which is 2 and a green for an instant with split second, which means more spells can't be cast on top of that. And it says destroy target artifact or enchantment. So that takes us through all of the cards in this deck outside of our lands. So we will look at the lands now. We've got Castle Garenbrig. You can pay into it for a little bit of extra mana, or it taps for a green. We've got 21 forests, and then we've got Mosswort Bridge, which has Hideaway 4. So you look at the top 4 cards of your library when this enters the battlefield tapped, and you select one of the 4 cards and you exile it under Mosswort Bridge. And then when you have met the requirement, which in this one is going to be creatures you control have a total power of 10 or greater, you can pay a green, tap Mosswort Bridge, and then cast that spell for free. There are other lands with Hideaway 4 in other colors as well. Then we've got Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx, taps for a colorless, or you can pay 2, tap it, choose a color, add mana to your mana pool in the amount of mana equal to your devotion to, in this case, green. Then we have Path of Ancestry. It enters tapped, and you can tap to add 1 mana of any color of your commander's color identity, and when mana is spent to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with your commander, you can scry 1. So with the top deck manipulation, the scry 1 is actually going to be really helpful from Path of Ancestry here. Then we have Reliquary Tower, which is going to give us no maximum hand size. We've got Rogue's Passage, which we can pay 4 into it, and a target creature can't be blocked this turn. We've got Temple of the False God, which taps for 2 colorless. We have Thespian Stage, which you can pay 2 and tap it, and it becomes a copy of a target land, except it has this ability. Then we've got War Room, add a colorless, and then you can pay 3, tap it, and pay life equal to the number of colors in your commander's color identity, which is going to be 1, as it is just green, and draw a card. So pay 3 and a life to draw a card. Then Wirewood Lodge, which adds colorless to your mana pool, and then you can pay a green and tap it to untap a target elf. So technically that could go in the tap and untap portion of our deck. And then lastly, we've got Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, which turns all of the lands on the battlefield into forests. And if we've got our Forest Walk creatures out, then we can get through and smack anybody with unblockable elves. And then we have a MDFC land, which is going to be Balaged Recovery, which is going to say return a target card from your graveyard to your hand. So that is the sorcery side. And then if you play it on its land side, it's going to be Balaged Sanctuary, and it enters tapped, and it taps for a green. So that is going to be all of the cards in this deck. So as far as convincing you that this is going to be the best mono green elves commander, I would encourage you to goldfish this maybe a little bit on our Mox field. We'll have the link to the deck in the description below so you can kind of see it for yourself, because that's probably the only way to convince you. But let me just say, I've test driven this a couple of times. I've played it, and it gets extremely out of hand, extremely fast, being able to cast these massive creatures, many of which give overrun effects. You are going to be the threat at the table. That would be the one downside to this deck, is that you are absolutely the threat from a very early point, and with elves, they are able to regenerate themselves quickly. They're inexpensive, and being able to pay a single green and tap 2 other elves to cheat in things like Craterhoof and Worldspine Worm and Galta, these are absolutely insane. Or these Eldrazi, and I didn't even go nuts with the creatures that I had. There are much worse Eldrazi and things like that you could absolutely put in this deck, and it be even more gross. I just didn't want it to be a bad time for other people. So to me, there's so much value in elves on their own. I've heard people argue for Marwyn being the number one commander because she provides so much value. But when you've got things like Nykthos and Marwyn and Priest of Titania and Wirewood Channeler and so on and so forth. There's 5 or 6 elves that do that for you. Mana is not going to be a problem in this deck. Mana is not going to be a problem with elves. It's mono green. You've got all the dorks in the world. They're cheap to recast. The biggest problem is just going to be keeping cards moving. And again, Eladamri kind of answers that, as you can cast cards from the top of your library, and there are like 47. So half of your deck, I think, is creatures, so you're going to be able to keep moving even without a ton of card draw because you have access to the top of that library, and with a few of those other cards where you have to manipulate the top of your library, you're just going to be able to keep casting and keep casting. So let me know what you guys think about this. Let me know what you think, if it's going to be that powerful or not, if it's going to be the go-to for mono elves, if you agree with that at all. If you have a completely opposing opinion, we would love to hear about it in the comments. Again, please like and subscribe. It helps us out a ton. Check out our other social medias. We're on Twitch, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, TikTok, Discord, Patreon, all of those things. Any support anywhere helps us out a ton. And we thank you guys so much for checking us out. Again, look at our channel if you like giveaways. We run one almost all the time, and we have a blast doing that kind of thing as well. So we hope everybody enjoyed this, and you guys have a lovely day, and we will talk to you next time. Bye-bye.